Sarah Martinez had always felt more at home on the water than on land. Growing up in a small fishing town in North Carolina, she learned to navigate boats before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her father, a commercial fisherman, taught her everything about reading the tides, understanding weather patterns, and respecting the ocean's power. But Sarah's dreams stretched far beyond the familiar waters of her hometown. At 18, she made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. Instead of following the expected path of marriage and settling down, Sarah enlisted in the Navy. Her parents were worried, her friends were confused, but Sarah knew exactly what she wanted. The ocean called to her, and she was determined to serve her country on the seas she loved so much. Basic training was brutal, but Sarah thrived under pressure. She excelled in every physical challenge, outperformed most of her male counterparts in swimming tests, and showed natural leadership abilities that caught the attention of her instructors. Her drill sergeants noticed something special about the quiet girl from North Carolina. She had an inner strength that couldn't be broken, and a determination that burned like fire. After completing basic training with honors, Sarah was selected for specialized maritime operations. This wasn't something she had expected, but when the opportunity came, she grabbed it without hesitation. The training was classified, intense, and pushed her beyond limits she didn't know she had. For months, she disappeared into a world of advanced combat techniques, underwater operations, and classified missions that she could never discuss with her family. The transformation was remarkable. The small-town girl who once helped her father mend fishing nets was now a highly trained special operations soldier. She learned to handle weapons with deadly precision, navigate in complete darkness, and survive in the harshest conditions imaginable. Her instructors pushed her harder than anyone else, not because they wanted her to fail, but because they recognized her exceptional potential. During one particularly challenging training exercise, Sarah found herself trapped underwater for what felt like an eternity. Her oxygen supply was running dangerously low, and panic began to creep in. But instead of giving up, she remembered her father's words about staying calm in rough waters. She controlled her breathing, found her way out of the underwater maze, and surfaced just as her instructors were preparing emergency protocols. That moment marked her transition from trainee to warrior. Sarah's first real mission came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated suspicious activity in international waters, and her team was deployed to investigate. She couldn't tell anyone where she was going or when she'd return. Her parents received only a brief phone call saying she'd be away for work, with no details about the dangerous operation she was about to undertake. The mission was a success, but it changed Sarah forever. She had proven herself under fire, saved lives, and helped prevent a potential international incident. However, the classified nature of her work meant she could never share these accomplishments with the people who mattered most to her. She returned home with commendations and medals that she had to keep secret, carrying the weight of experiences she could never fully explain. Years passed, and Sarah completed multiple classified missions around the world. She became known among her peers as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive operations. Her superiors valued her judgment, her skills, and her unwavering loyalty to her country. But the constant secrecy took its toll on her personal relationships. When Sarah finally decided to leave active duty, she was decorated with honors that most people would never see or understand. She had served her country with distinction, but now she wanted something different. She wanted to return to the simple joy she had felt as a child on her father's fishing boat, to reconnect with the ocean in a way that brought peace instead of danger. Sarah used her military benefits and savings to purchase a modest boat, nothing fancy but seaworthy and reliable. She planned to start a small charter business, taking tourists on fishing trips and sunset cruises. It seemed like the perfect way to transition from her high-stress military career to a more peaceful civilian life. She named the boat Quiet Waters, hoping it would bring her the tranquility she had been missing. The boat became her sanctuary. Every morning she would check the engine, inspect the safety equipment, and prepare for another day on the water. Her military training made her incredibly thorough. She maintained her vessel better than most people maintained their cars. Safety was always her top priority, and she treated every trip as seriously as she had treated her classified missions. Sarah's business grew slowly but steadily. Word spread about the knowledgeable captain who could find fish when others couldn't, and who made even nervous passengers feel safe on rough seas. She had a gift for reading people just as well as she read the weather. Families returned year after year, bringing friends and relatives who wanted to experience the ocean with someone who truly understood its moods. But Sarah's military past was never far from her thoughts. She kept her Special Forces identification in a waterproof case, not out of pride, but as a reminder of who she had been and what she had sacrificed. Sometimes, late at night when she was alone on her boat, she would look at the stars and remember missions she could never discuss, friends she had lost, and moments of terror and triumph that had shaped her into the person she was today. The ocean had been her calling, her training ground, and now her livelihood. She had served her country with honor in ways that most people would never know or understand. Now, as a civilian, she was finally free to enjoy the simple pleasure of being on the water without the weight of national security on her shoulders. Or so she thought. Sarah had no way of knowing that her peaceful new life was about to collide with her classified past in ways she never could have imagined. The calm waters she sought were about to become stormy again, and her Special Forces training would prove more valuable than ever. The skills that had kept her alive in combat zones around the world were about to be tested in her own backyard by people who had no idea who they were dealing with. The morning started like any other for Sarah. She arrived at the marina before dawn, carrying her usual thermos of coffee and a bag containing safety equipment, charts, and emergency supplies. The sky was clear, with just a gentle breeze that promised perfect conditions for the fishing charter she had scheduled. A group of friends from Atlanta had booked a full-day trip, hoping to catch some red snapper and enjoy a day away from their corporate jobs. Sarah went through her pre-departure routine with military precision. She checked the engine oil, tested the radio, verified that all safety equipment was properly secured, and reviewed the weather forecast one more time. Her boat might not have been the newest or most expensive in the marina, but it was maintained to standards that would have impressed any military inspector. She had learned long ago that attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. The charter customers arrived right on time, clearly excited about their ocean adventure. There were 4 men in their 40s, all friends since college, who had made this annual fishing trip a tradition. They were loud, enthusiastic, and clearly ready to have a good time. Sarah smiled as she helped them aboard, remembering how she used to get that same excitement before her first military deployments, back when everything was new and thrilling. As they headed out to sea, Sarah pointed out various landmarks and shared some local fishing wisdom. She explained how to read the water, where different species like to feed, and what weather signs to watch for. Her customers were impressed by her knowledge and confidence. They had no idea they were being guided by someone who had navigated far more dangerous waters than these peaceful coastal areas. The fishing was excellent that day. Sarah knew exactly where to find the best spots, and her customers were thrilled as they pulled in one impressive fish after another. She helped them with their technique, untangled lines, and made sure everyone had chances to catch something memorable. Between fishing spots, she shared stories about local marine life and fishing traditions, carefully avoiding any mention of her military background. Around midday, while they were anchored over a productive reef, Sarah noticed something on the horizon. Years of training had sharpened her ability to spot things that others might miss. A Coast Guard cutter was approaching, moving faster than normal patrol speed. Her military instincts kicked in automatically, and she began assessing the situation with the same analytical mindset she had developed during classified operations. The Coast Guard vessel changed course directly toward them, and Sarah could see crew members on deck preparing for what appeared to be a boarding operation. This was unusual, but not unprecedented. The Coast Guard had authority to inspect any vessel in these waters, and random safety inspections were part of their routine duties. Sarah felt confident that her boat would pass any inspection with flying colors. Her customers noticed the approaching Coast Guard ship and started making jokes about getting arrested for catching too many fish. Sarah smiled and assured them that this was probably just a routine safety check. Inside, however, she was running through possibilities. Her boat was properly registered, all her licenses were current, and she had never had any legal troubles. There was no reason for concern. The Coast Guard cutter pulled alongside with practiced efficiency. Sarah could see at least 6 crew members, all businesslike and professional in their approach. The officer in charge used a loudspeaker to request permission to come aboard for a routine inspection. Sarah responded appropriately, securing her fishing lines and preparing to receive the boarding party. 3 Coast Guard personnel transferred to Sarah's boat. The boarding officer was a young lieutenant who looked fresh out of the academy, accompanied by 2 petty officers who seemed more experienced. They were polite but thorough as they began their inspection, checking safety equipment, examining documentation, and asking standard questions about the vessel and its operations. Sarah's customers were fascinated by the process, asking the Coast Guard officers about their duties and taking photos of the official inspection. The atmosphere remained friendly and relaxed as the Coast Guard team went through their checklist. Everything was in perfect order, just as Sarah knew it would be. Her military background had instilled habits of maintenance and preparation that exceeded civilian standards. However, the inspection took an unexpected turn when the boarding officer began asking more detailed questions about Sarah's business operations. He wanted to see her commercial license, insurance documents, and passenger manifests for recent trips. These were reasonable requests, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't entirely routine. Sarah provided all requested documents without hesitation, but her trained instincts were telling her that something wasn't quite right. The questioning became more intensive. The young lieutenant asked about Sarah's background, how long she had been operating the charter business, and whether she had ever had any problems with authorities. His questions were still within bounds, but they seemed to be following a script rather than flowing from genuine curiosity or standard safety concerns. Sarah answered every question honestly and completely. She explained her fishing background, her decision to start the charter business, and her commitment to safety and customer satisfaction. She remained calm and cooperative, but her military training had taught her to stay alert when situations began to develop in unexpected directions. One of the petty officers was conducting a more detailed search of the boat than seemed necessary for a routine safety inspection. He was looking in compartments, checking storage areas, and examining equipment with unusual thoroughness. Sarah began to wonder if they were looking for something specific, though she couldn't imagine what that might be. The lieutenant's radio crackled with communication from the Coast Guard cutter. Sarah couldn't hear the details, but she noticed a change in the officer's demeanor after the conversation. He became more formal, more cautious, and began treating the situation with increased seriousness. Something was definitely happening beyond a routine inspection. Sarah's customers were starting to notice the change in atmosphere as well. Their earlier enthusiasm was being replaced by concern as they realized this was taking much longer than expected. They began asking Sarah if there was a problem, but she could only reassure them that everything would be resolved shortly. The boarding officer requested that Sarah provide additional identification beyond her standard operator's license. This was the moment when everything began to shift dramatically. Sarah reached for her waterproof document case, the same one that contained her Special Forces identification. She had a choice to make: provide only civilian documentation or reveal her military background. At this point, she saw no reason to complicate matters by bringing up her classified service record. Sarah handed over her driver's license and commercial operator's certificate, keeping her military identification secured in the sealed compartment of her document case. She had learned during her service that revealing classified information unnecessarily could create more problems than it solved. The Coast Guard officers examined her civilian documents carefully, but their behavior suggested they were still searching for something more. The lieutenant stepped aside to make another radio call to his commanding officer. Sarah could hear fragments of the conversation, words like verification and database check, that indicated they were running some kind of background investigation on her. This was definitely not a standard safety inspection anymore. Her military training kicked in, and she began mentally cataloging everything she observed about the Coast Guard crew, their equipment, and their procedures. Meanwhile, her customers were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. They had expected a relaxing day of fishing, not a law enforcement encounter. One of them, a lawyer named David, began asking pointed questions about the legal basis for the extended detention. The Coast Guard officers explained that they had authority to conduct thorough inspections, but they couldn't provide specific reasons for the heightened scrutiny. The petty officer searching the boat had moved to areas that seemed far beyond normal safety concerns. He was checking inside the engine compartment, examining the fuel system, and even looking at areas where safety equipment was stored. Sarah realized they were conducting what amounted to a criminal investigation, though she had no idea what they might be looking for. After nearly 30 minutes of searching and questioning, the lieutenant received another radio communication that seemed to change everything. His expression became more serious, and he began speaking in hushed tones with his team members. Sarah noticed them looking at her with increased suspicion, as if they had discovered something significant during their background check. The boarding officer approached Sarah with a new level of authority in his voice. He informed her that they had received information suggesting possible irregularities in her business operations, and that they needed to conduct a more comprehensive investigation. This was the moment Sarah realized she was being treated as a suspect rather than a cooperative vessel operator. Sarah asked what specific irregularities they were investigating, but the lieutenant provided only vague references to ongoing investigations and security concerns. Her military experience had taught her to recognize when officials were following protocols they couldn't fully explain. Something bigger was happening here, and she was somehow caught in the middle of it. The Coast Guard team began preparing to escort her boat back to port for further investigation. This escalation concerned Sarah's customers, who had done nothing wrong and simply wanted to complete their fishing trip. She assured them that she would handle the situation and that they would be released as soon as the authorities finished whatever investigation they were conducting. David, the lawyer among her customers, offered to contact his firm and provide legal assistance. Sarah appreciated his offer but politely declined, explaining that she preferred to handle the matter herself. She had dealt with military bureaucracy for years and felt confident she could resolve whatever misunderstanding had occurred. As they began the journey back to shore under Coast Guard escort, Sarah tried to piece together what might have triggered this investigation. She reviewed her recent activities, her business records, and any interactions she might have had that could be misinterpreted. Nothing came to mind that would justify this level of official attention. The lieutenant continued asking questions during the return trip. He wanted details about her customers, her business relationships, and her personal background. Sarah answered truthfully, but began to realize that her civilian life was being scrutinized in ways that felt familiar from her military service. Someone, somewhere, had flagged her for investigation. Her customers remained supportive but clearly anxious about the situation. They had paid for a fishing charter and were now involved in what appeared to be a law enforcement operation. Sarah felt responsible for their discomfort and promised to ensure they received full refunds for the interrupted trip, regardless of how the investigation concluded. Back at the marina, additional Coast Guard personnel were waiting. Sarah could see investigators with clipboards, cameras, and evidence collection equipment. This was clearly not a simple regulatory matter. It had all the appearances of a serious criminal investigation. She began to wonder if someone had made false allegations against her, or if there had been some kind of mistaken identity. The Coast Guard team secured her boat and began a detailed examination of every system, compartment, and piece of equipment aboard. They photographed everything, took measurements, and carefully documented their findings. Sarah watched with growing concern as her livelihood was systematically dismantled and examined by investigators who seemed to suspect her of serious wrongdoing. Her customers were interviewed separately, with Coast Guard personnel asking detailed questions about their interactions with Sarah, their observations during the trip, and any conversations they might have overheard. The men were cooperative but confused, explaining repeatedly that Sarah had been professional, knowledgeable, and completely appropriate in all her conduct. Sarah was asked to wait in a small office while the investigation continued. The room was sterile and uncomfortable, clearly designed for interviewing people who might not be there voluntarily. She used the time to think through her options and consider what might have led to this situation. Her mind kept returning to her classified military service and whether something from that period might have created current complications. The waiting became increasingly difficult as hours passed without explanation. Sarah could hear investigators moving around the marina, talking to other boat owners and examining marina records. Whatever they were investigating seemed to involve more than just her individual boat or business operations. A senior Coast Guard officer finally entered the interview room. He introduced himself as Commander Peterson and explained that they were investigating potential security violations related to maritime operations in the area. Sarah listened carefully, but still couldn't understand how she had become involved in their investigation. Commander Peterson's questions were more sophisticated than those asked by the boarding team. He wanted to know about her background, her training, her business relationships, and her knowledge of maritime security protocols. Sarah answered honestly while trying to understand what specific concerns had triggered the investigation. The commander mentioned that their background check had revealed some interesting information about her past, though he didn't specify what they had discovered. Sarah realized they had probably found references to her military service, though her classified records should have been protected from routine law enforcement inquiries. As evening approached, Sarah began to understand that this situation was not going to be resolved quickly. The Coast Guard had invested significant resources in this investigation, and they clearly believed they were pursuing something important. She wondered how long she could maintain her silence about her Special Forces background before it became necessary to reveal information she had hoped to keep private forever. Commander Peterson continued his questioning late into the evening, focusing on details that seemed increasingly specific and concerning. He asked about Sarah's knowledge of foreign nationals in the area, her awareness of any unusual maritime activities, and whether she had noticed any suspicious vessels or behaviors during her charter operations. These questions suggested they suspected her of involvement in something far more serious than regulatory violations. Sarah maintained her cooperative attitude, while growing increasingly frustrated with the vague accusations and prolonged detention. She had answered every question honestly, provided all requested documentation, and submitted to searches that seemed to go far beyond normal authority. Yet the investigators continued treating her as a suspect in an unspecified investigation. The commander's radio buzzed with an urgent message, and he stepped outside to take the call privately. Through the thin walls, Sarah could hear fragments of conversation that included words like classified, verification, and higher authority. Something significant was developing, and she began to suspect that her military background was about to become relevant whether she wanted it to or not. When Commander Peterson returned, his demeanor had changed noticeably. He seemed more cautious, almost uncertain about how to proceed. He informed Sarah that they needed to verify some additional information about her background and that the investigation would continue the following day. She was free to go home, but should remain available for further questioning. Sarah left the marina feeling exhausted and confused. Her boat was still impounded, her business was effectively shut down, and she had no clear understanding of what she was accused of doing wrong. The drive home gave her time to think through the day's events and consider her options going forward. That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept replaying the investigation, analyzing every question and trying to understand what had triggered such intense scrutiny. Her military training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, but this situation felt different because she genuinely didn't know what she was supposed to have done wrong. Early the next morning, Sarah's phone rang with a call from a number she didn't recognize. The caller identified himself as Agent Martinez from a federal agency she had worked with during her military service. He explained that he needed to meet with her immediately regarding the Coast Guard investigation and that she should bring her complete military identification. The meeting took place at a small coffee shop away from the marina and official buildings. Agent Martinez was someone Sarah vaguely remembered from classified briefings years earlier, though they had never worked together directly. He explained that her name had appeared in a federal database search related to a completely different investigation, and that the Coast Guard had been notified of a potential security concern. According to Agent Martinez, foreign agents had been using small boats to conduct surveillance and intelligence gathering operations along the coast. The Coast Guard had been instructed to investigate any vessel operators with military backgrounds who might have been compromised or recruited by hostile intelligence services. Sarah's Special Forces background had triggered automatic scrutiny. When her business license was processed through federal databases, Sarah was stunned to learn that her classified service record had been accessible to the Coast Guard investigation. She had been told that her Special Forces identification and service history would remain protected under military security protocols. The revelation that this information was being shared with civilian law enforcement agencies was deeply concerning. Agent Martinez assured her that the investigation would be resolved quickly once her military service was properly verified and her security clearance status confirmed. However, he explained that the process required coordination between multiple agencies and could take several days to complete. In the meantime, she would remain under investigation. Sarah decided this was the moment to reveal her Special Forces identification. She had been reluctant to complicate the situation by introducing classified elements, but it was clear that her military background was already central to the investigation. She retrieved the waterproof case from her truck and prepared to show documentation she had hoped to keep private. Back at the Coast Guard station, Sarah requested another meeting with Commander Peterson. This time she came prepared with her complete military identification, including credentials that few people outside the special operations community would recognize. She had decided to be completely transparent about her background, hoping it would resolve the misunderstandings that had led to her detention. When Sarah presented her Special Forces identification, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Commander Peterson examined the credentials carefully, made several phone calls to verify their authenticity, and suddenly began treating her with a level of respect that had been completely absent during the previous day's interrogation. The commander explained that they had been investigating potential security threats, without realizing they were dealing with someone who had served with distinction in classified operations. Sarah's military record showed years of service in sensitive positions that required the highest levels of security clearance and loyalty verification. The suggestion that she might be working with foreign agents was not just wrong, it was absurd. Within hours of revealing her Special Forces background, the entire investigation changed direction. Instead of being treated as a suspect, Sarah found herself being consulted as an expert on maritime security issues. The Coast Guard wanted her insights about the real threats they were investigating and her professional assessment of suspicious activities in the area. Sarah learned that the original investigation had been triggered by intelligence reports about foreign surveillance operations targeting military installations and shipping lanes. Small boat operators were being scrutinized because several suspicious vessels had been spotted conducting unusual activities near sensitive coastal areas. Her military background had made her a person of interest, but now it made her a valuable resource. The Coast Guard offered Sarah a consulting contract to help with their security investigation. Her combination of military experience and current maritime operations made her uniquely qualified to identify suspicious activities that might be missed by personnel without Special Forces training. She could continue operating her charter business while serving as an unofficial security observer. Sarah was conflicted about the offer. She had left military service specifically to avoid continued involvement in security operations, but she also felt obligated to help protect national interests. When asked, the Coast Guard emphasized that her assistance could be crucial in identifying real threats while protecting innocent boat operators from unnecessary harassment. After considering the situation overnight, Sarah agreed to provide limited assistance to the Coast Guard investigation. She would share any observations about unusual maritime activities while maintaining her civilian charter business. However, she insisted that her Special Forces background remain classified and that her involvement in the security investigation be kept confidential. The arrangement satisfied everyone involved. Sarah's boat was returned, her business resumed operations, and she began serving as an unofficial set of trained eyes watching for genuine security threats. The Coast Guard gained access to her expertise while learning valuable lessons about the importance of proper coordination when military backgrounds intersect with civilian investigations. Over the following weeks, Sarah's life settled into an unusual routine. During the day, she operated her charter fishing business as normal, taking customers out to enjoy the ocean and pursue their favorite fish. But now she was also watching for signs of the suspicious activities that had triggered the Coast Guard investigation. Her trained eyes scanned the horizon with new purpose, looking for vessels that didn't belong or behaviors that seemed out of place. The transition wasn't as difficult as Sarah had expected. Her military instincts had never really disappeared. They had simply been dormant during her civilian life. Now that she was actively engaged in security observation, she found herself naturally falling back into patterns of alertness and analysis that had kept her alive during classified operations years earlier. Sarah's customers noticed that she seemed even more aware of her surroundings than before, but they attributed this to her exceptional seamanship rather than any security mission. She continued providing excellent fishing experiences while simultaneously conducting surveillance that her clients never suspected. The dual role required careful balance, but Sarah's training had prepared her for operating undercover in challenging circumstances. After 3 weeks of routine observations, Sarah spotted something that immediately caught her attention. A small fishing boat was anchored in an area where fish were rarely found, with crew members who seemed more interested in watching the coastline than fishing. Their behavior patterns and positioning suggested surveillance rather than recreational or commercial fishing activities. Sarah discreetly photographed the suspicious vessel and its crew while maintaining her normal charter operations. Her military training had taught her how to gather intelligence without attracting attention, and she was able to document the boat's registration numbers, crew size, and unusual equipment without anyone noticing her observations. That evening, Sarah reported her findings to Commander Peterson using secure communication protocols they had established. The Coast Guard was very interested in her information, particularly when she described sophisticated equipment that seemed inconsistent with the vessel's apparent fishing purpose. Her observations provided the first concrete evidence of the suspicious activities they had been investigating. The Coast Guard requested that Sarah maintain surveillance on the suspicious vessel if it returned to the area. They emphasized the importance of staying undetected while gathering additional intelligence about the boat's operations and crew. Sarah agreed, though she insisted on maintaining her normal business activities to avoid suspicion. 2 days later, the suspicious boat returned to the same general area. This time, Sarah was prepared with better equipment and a clear mission. She positioned her charter boat to maintain visual contact while appearing to conduct normal fishing activities. Her customers had no idea they were participating in a counterintelligence operation while enjoying their ocean adventure. Sarah observed the suspicious crew conducting what appeared to be systematic surveillance of coastal installations. They used high-powered binoculars and sophisticated communication equipment to monitor military facilities and shipping traffic. Their activities clearly went beyond anything related to fishing or legitimate maritime operations. The intelligence Sarah gathered proved crucial to the broader investigation. Her detailed observations allowed the Coast Guard to establish patterns of suspicious activity and identify multiple vessels involved in coordinated surveillance operations. The threat was more extensive than anyone had initially realized, and Sarah's unique position had provided insights that traditional law enforcement methods had missed. Commander Peterson informed Sarah that her intelligence had triggered a multi-agency investigation involving the Coast Guard, FBI, and other federal agencies. The suspicious activities appeared to be part of a larger foreign intelligence operation targeting American maritime infrastructure and military installations along the coast. Sarah felt both pride and concern about her role in uncovering this threat. Her military training had prepared her to contribute to national security, but she had hoped to leave such responsibilities behind when she entered civilian life. Now she found herself once again serving her country, though in ways she had never anticipated. The investigation expanded rapidly as additional suspicious vessels were identified throughout the region. Sarah's observations had provided the breakthrough that allowed authorities to recognize a coordinated intelligence gathering operation, rather than isolated incidents of unusual behavior. Her special forces background had proven invaluable in identifying threats that others might have dismissed. However, Sarah's involvement in the investigation also created new complications for her personal life. The demands of surveillance work conflicted with her desire to maintain a simple charter fishing business. She had to balance customer service with intelligence gathering, always careful not to compromise either mission. Sarah's customers began noticing subtle changes in her behavior, though they couldn't identify exactly what was different. She seemed more focused on certain areas of the ocean, more interested in other boats they encountered, and occasionally distracted by activities that seemed unrelated to fishing. Some customers asked if she was conducting research or working on special projects. The psychological pressure of maintaining her cover while conducting surveillance reminded Sarah of the stress she had experienced during classified military operations. The constant need to appear normal while staying alert for threats required mental discipline that she had hoped to leave behind. She found herself missing the straightforward nature of her early civilian life. Despite these challenges, Sarah remained committed to helping resolve the security threat. Her unique combination of military training and civilian maritime operations made her an irreplaceable asset to the investigation. The intelligence she provided was helping protect national security interests, while ensuring that innocent boat operators weren't subjected to unnecessary harassment. As the investigation progressed, Sarah learned that the foreign surveillance operation was more sophisticated than initially suspected. The hostile intelligence service was using multiple small boats to create a comprehensive picture of American coastal defenses, shipping patterns, and military activities. Her observations had helped identify a significant national security threat. The Coast Guard began planning operational responses based on Sarah's intelligence gathering. They were preparing to intercept the suspicious vessels and arrest the foreign agents involved in the surveillance operation. Sarah's role was shifting from intelligence gathering to operational support, requiring her to use skills she hadn't exercised since leaving active military service. Sarah realized that her quiet civilian life was about to become significantly more complicated. The investigation she had unwillingly joined was approaching a critical phase that would require her full attention and complete commitment. Her Special Forces background, which had initially caused problems with the Coast Guard, was now essential to resolving a genuine threat to national security. The operation to intercept the foreign surveillance network required careful coordination and precise timing. Sarah found herself at the center of planning sessions that reminded her of classified military briefings from her Special Forces days. The Coast Guard, FBI, and other agencies were working together to neutralize the threat while gathering maximum intelligence about the foreign operation. Sarah's role in the final phase was crucial but dangerous. She would continue operating her charter business to maintain cover while serving as the primary surveillance asset during the takedown operation. Her boat would be equipped with concealed communication equipment, and she would coordinate with Coast Guard vessels positioned beyond the horizon. The night before the operation, Sarah couldn't sleep. She was experiencing the same pre-mission anxiety she remembered from her military service, a mixture of excitement, fear, and responsibility that came with knowing that lives might depend on her performance. She had thought those feelings were behind her forever, but they returned with familiar intensity. Early that morning, Sarah prepared her boat with even more attention to detail than usual. Every system had to be perfect, because there would be no room for mechanical failures. During the operation, she also had to balance her boat's appearance as a normal charter vessel with the hidden capabilities required for her intelligence mission. Her customers that day were a family celebrating a wedding anniversary, an older couple with their adult children who had planned this fishing trip as a special celebration. Sarah felt guilty involving innocent civilians in a potentially dangerous operation, but the mission parameters required maintaining absolute normalcy to avoid alerting the suspicious vessels. As they headed out to sea, Sarah's military training kicked in automatically. She was simultaneously a charter captain providing excellent customer service and a special operations asset preparing for a complex mission. The dual roles required complete mental discipline and perfect performance in both capacities. The suspicious boats appeared right on schedule, following patterns Sarah had documented over previous weeks. She notified the Coast Guard using concealed communication equipment while maintaining cheerful conversation with her anniversary celebration customers. Her ability to compartmentalize different aspects of the situation was being tested to its limits. Sarah maneuvered her boat to optimal positions for intelligence gathering, while ensuring her customers had opportunities to catch fish and enjoy their special day. The foreign surveillance crew showed no signs of suspecting they were being watched by someone with extensive counterintelligence training. Through her concealed earpiece, Sarah received updates on Coast Guard positions and timing for the coordinated interception. Multiple agencies were moving into position around the suspicious vessels, preparing to execute simultaneous arrests that would prevent any escape or evidence destruction. The moment of action arrived suddenly. Coast Guard cutters appeared from multiple directions, surrounding the suspicious vessels before their crews could react. Sarah watched through binoculars as heavily armed boarding teams secured each boat and detained personnel who had been conducting surveillance against American interests for weeks or possibly months. Sarah's customers were amazed by the dramatic law enforcement operation unfolding around them. They assumed they were witnessing a routine Coast Guard exercise or drug interdiction operation. Sarah played along with their assumptions while feeling intense satisfaction at seeing the foreign surveillance network finally neutralized. The arrest proceeded smoothly, with no resistance from the foreign agents who clearly had not expected to be discovered. Years of sophisticated intelligence gathering came to an abrupt end as their equipment was seized and their personnel taken into custody for questioning and eventual prosecution or deportation. Commander Peterson's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece with a simple message. Mission accomplished. Excellent work. Those words carried Sarah back to similar moments during her military service when successful operations concluded with recognition from commanding officers who understood the risks and skills involved. As the Coast Guard vessels escorted the arrested surveillance teams toward port, Sarah's customers peppered her with questions about the exciting operation they had witnessed. She explained that the Coast Guard regularly conducted training exercises and law enforcement operations in these waters, staying as close to the truth